The ballroom doors groaned open, and the room died. Not slowly, not politely. The kind of silence that crushes oxygen from the air and makes 100 millionaires forget how to breathe. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses paused halfway to lips. A senator's laugh choked in his throat. She stepped onto the crimson carpet. Midnight obsidian silk, floor length. Structured like armor. But it was the emerald that made grown men gasp. A raw 50-carat stone the color of old money and older secrets, hanging heavy against her collarbone. The heart of the Welt. A piece so rare that when it sold in Zurich 6 months ago, 3 newspapers ran front-page stories about the anonymous buyer who paid a record-breaking sum. Zenzile moved through the silence like she owned it. Because she did. Thalmus Thorne stood near the entrance. Cocktail glass halfway to his mouth, frozen. His brain couldn't process what his eyes were showing him. The woman who scrubbed his toilets. The woman who emptied his trash. The woman whose name he sometimes forgot mid-sentence. She was here, in his ballroom, wearing a gown that cost more than most people earned in a decade. His glass slipped. The sound of crystal shattering on marble echoed like a gunshot. Every head turned. Thalmus's face went from confusion to recognition to something uglier, panic wrapped in rage. He lunged toward her, shoving past a tech mogul and nearly knocking over an heiress. "Where did you get that?" His voice came out strangled, desperate. He grabbed her arm, fingers digging in. "If you stole from my safe, I will bury you so deep you'll never see daylight again." Zenzale didn't flinch. She looked down at his hand on her arm, then slowly back up to his face. When she spoke, her voice carried across the ballroom with the kind of calm that makes people lean in. "You spent 10 years telling me I was invisible, Thalmus." She adjusted her gloves, each movement precise and deliberate. "I simply decided to finally turn the lights on." He opened his mouth to scream for security. The words never came, because 3 men in plain clothes stepped out from behind the champagne fountain, badges raised high enough for the front row to see. "Thalmus Thorne," the lead investigator said, his voice flat and official. "You're under arrest." The room exploded into whispers. But to understand how a maid brought a billionaire to his knees in front of Manhattan's elite, how a woman who spent a decade cleaning toilets ended up wearing an emerald that made senators stare, you need to go back. Back to before the gown, before the emerald, before Zenzale learned that invisibility isn't weakness, it's camouflage. 10 years earlier. The penthouse smelled like lemon polish and lies. Zenzile moved through the 15,000-square-foot glass fortress at dawn when the city below still slept, and the marble floors caught the first light. She knew the routine by heart now. Dust the bookshelves Thalmus never read. Wipe down the kitchen counters where he never cooked. Empty the trash bins overflowing with shredded documents and crushed ambition. She was a ghost in her own life. Thalmus Thorne barely looked at her that first month. When he did, it was the way you might glance at a lamp or a coat rack. Something functional, forgettable, beneath notice. He spoke past her, through her, around her. Never to her. "The Ramirez deal closes Friday," he barked into his phone one morning, pacing past where she knelt scrubbing baseboards. His Italian loafer came within inches of her hand. He didn't slow down. "I don't care about their counteroffer. They'll take what I give them or I'll crush them into dust." Zenzile kept scrubbing. She'd learned early that Thalmus Thorne saw people in exactly 2 categories: assets or liabilities. The rich were assets to be leveraged. Everyone else was either useful or disposable. She was useful. Barely. "You missed a spot," he said one afternoon, not even turning around. He was staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city he thought he owned, tie loosened, whiskey in hand. There, by the desk. Zenzile looked. There was no spot, but she got down on her knees anyway and wiped the already gleaming floor. "Better," he muttered, still not looking. She watched him sometimes when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Watched him shred documents at midnight, the machine whirring loud enough to wake the building. Watched him take calls on his burner phone, the one he kept in the false bottom of his desk drawer. Watched him count cash he never deposited, bundled in rubber bands and stuffed into a safe behind the abstract painting in his office. Thalmus thought her silence meant she was simple. He was wrong. It was the silence of someone taking notes. 3 months in, she started carrying her old smartphone in her apron pocket. The camera still worked, even if the screen was cracked. Late nights when Thalmus entertained business associates, the kind who arrived through the service entrance and left before sunrise, she'd find reasons to clean nearby. Dust the hallway, empty the office trash, wipe down surfaces that didn't need wiping. Click. The camera never made a sound. Contracts left carelessly on desks. Spreadsheets with numbers that didn't add up. Emails opened on computer screens. She memorized passwords by watching his fingers on the keyboard, counting the rhythm. 8 characters. Capital letter first, number at the end. She never rushed, never pushed, never gave him a reason to look twice. Have you ever been invisible? Not ignored, truly invisible. Where people speak freely because they forget you're human enough to have ears, a brain, a memory? It's a strange kind of power. The kind nobody teaches you about in business school. Welcome to my channel. Please do well to support by liking and subscribing, and comment where you are watching from. See you at the end of the video. God bless you. By year 2, Zenzile knew things about Thalmus Thorne that his lawyers didn't know. She knew about the offshore accounts, the shell companies registered in Delaware under names that sounded like law firms, the real estate deals structured just carefully enough to look legal while dancing on the razor's edge of fraud. She knew he bribed a city councilman named Morrison every 3rd Thursday, cash in a manila envelope, handed off in the parking garage. She knew he'd bought 3 judges over the years, not directly, never directly, but through campaign contributions that came with very specific expectations. She knew because she listened, because she filed the papers he threw away, because she pieced together shredded documents like puzzles during her lunch breaks, using tape and patience and a fury that burned so quietly even she sometimes forgot it was there. One night, late, so late the city had gone dark except for scattered windows of insomniacs and ambition, she heard voices from his office. She'd stayed to finish the laundry, or that's what she'd say if anyone asked. Really, she'd seen the light under his door and curiosity had pulled her close. "The land trust won't sell," a man's voice said. Nervous, young, probably an associate from the firm. "They will." Thalmus sounded bored. "They're peasants sitting on prime real estate. I've already lined up the permits." "The city council votes next month." "But the community," Thalmus interrupted, "will take whatever I offer or lose everything. That's how this works. I'm not interested in negotiation. I'm interested in acquisition." Zenzile's hand froze on the doorknob to the laundry room. "What about the families?" the associate pressed. "There are over 200 people who depend on that land. The urban farm program, the affordable housing. Collateral damage." Ice clinked in Thalmus's glass. "By this time next year, that land will be luxury condos. The profit margin is extraordinary. The people? They'll figure it out. They always do." She heard the associate leave 20 minutes later, footsteps quick and uncomfortable on the marble. She waited until Thalmus's office light clicked off, until she heard his bedroom door close. Then she slipped into his office, pulled the day's files from his desk, and photographed every page. The land trust, the bribes to push the zoning changes through, the projected profits, hundreds of millions, the list of families about to lose everything. Her hands didn't shake. They never did anymore. Because Zenzile had learned something important over those 2 years of invisibility. Patience is a weapon, and she was just getting started sharpening hers. She filed the papers back exactly as she'd found them, wiped down the desk to erase fingerprints, turned off the light, closed the door with the kind of silence that comes from practice. On her way out, she paused by the massive abstract painting in the entryway, the one Thelmus had paid some obscene amount for, more interested in the price tag than the art. Her reflection stared back from the glass, distorted and dark. She barely recognized herself anymore, but that was fine. Thelmus didn't recognize her at all, and that was exactly the point. The next morning, Thelmus stood in his kitchen, barking orders into his phone about interest rates and acquisition timelines. Zenzel poured his coffee, black, no sugar, exactly 180 degrees, and set it on the counter within arm's reach. He didn't say thank you. He never did. But as she turned to leave, he glanced up. Just for a second. His eyes passed right over her face like she was furniture. She smiled. Small, invisible. 3 years down, 7 to go. The Community Land Trust sat on the edge of the Lower East Side, 12 acres of green in a concrete jungle. For 40 years, it had been a refuge. Urban gardens where families grew vegetables, affordable housing for artists and teachers, a community center where kids learned to paint, and old men played chess on warped boards. It wasn't glamorous, but it was theirs. Thelmus Thorne wanted it erased, not for any personal reason. He didn't hate the people there. He didn't think about them enough to hate them. They were just numbers on a spreadsheet, obstacles between him and a profit margin that would make his competitors choke with envy. Zenzel had watched him work before. The hostile takeovers, the leveraged buyouts, the carefully orchestrated destructions disguised as business. But this was different. This was calculated cruelty on a scale that made her stomach twist. She started paying attention to the details. Every Thursday at 3, Thelmus met with his development team. Architects, lawyers, the kind of consultants who specialized in making impossible things look legal. Zenziel made sure to vacuum the hallway outside the conference room during those meetings. The air vents carried sound better than people realized. The environmental assessment came back clean, one lawyer said, his voice muffled but clear enough. Technically, we had to bury the original soil samples that showed contamination, but the second round tested fine. And the families? That was Marcus Chen, the lead architect. He sounded uncomfortable. Eviction notices go out in 6 weeks, Thelmus replied. We're offering 30 days to vacate. Generous, considering we don't legally have to offer anything. What about relocation assistance? Thelmus laughed, actually laughed. Marcus, this isn't a charity. They're getting market rate buyouts for their leases. If they can't afford to stay in the city afterward, that's not my problem. There's plenty of affordable housing in New Jersey. The vacuum hummed. Zenzel pushed it slowly back and forth, her face blank, her mind recording every word. Market rate buyouts. She'd seen the numbers. Thelmus was offering 60% of actual value, and only to the leaseholders. The renters got nothing. 200 families about to be scattered like dust, and he was calling it generous. That night, she photographed the development plans, the fake environmental reports, the budget projections showing exactly how much profit came from lowballing desperate families. Every page, every number, every signature. Her phone's storage was almost full. She'd have to buy a new one soon. Something with more memory. Something that could hold the evidence of 100 crimes. But evidence wasn't enough. She'd learned that the hard way. You needed leverage. You needed timing. You needed the person you were hunting to feel so untouchable, so drunk on their own power, that they'd make the kind of mistake you could exploit. Thelmus was getting close. She could feel it in the way he talked, louder, more careless. The way he left documents out overnight, confident that nobody who mattered would see them. The way he started taking phone calls in front of her, discussing bribes and manipulation like she was a lamp. She just needed him to go one step further. 2 months before the evictions were scheduled, Thelmus threw a party. Not unusual, he threw parties constantly, each one a performance designed to remind people of his wealth and their dependence on it. But this one was different. Exclusivity Gala, he announced to his assistant one morning, while Zenzel wiped down the kitchen island he'd just splattered with coffee. Black tie, senators, tech CEOs, anyone worth knowing. We're celebrating the land trust acquisition. I want everyone to see what vision looks like. His assistant scribbled notes. Guest list? The usual, plus a few surprises. Thalmus grinned, the expression sharp and ugly. I want to make a statement. Zenziel kept wiping, kept listening. 3 days later, she found the invitation on the kitchen counter where she set out Thalmus's breakfast. Gold leaf, embossed lettering, her name in elegant script, Zenziel Malangu. She stared at it for a long moment, pulse steady, mind calculating. Thalmus walked in, already on his phone, already distracted. He saw her holding the invitation and his grin widened. Ah, you found it. He poured himself coffee, not bothering to look at her directly. Consider yourself invited to the gala, Zenziel. Come see how the other half lives. She waited. There was more. There was always more with men like Thalmus. Oh, and don't worry about the dress code. His voice dripped with false generosity. Just wear your work clothes. I want my guests to understand the full picture, the people who build empires and the people who clean up after them. It'll be educational. He walked out, laughing at his own joke. Zenziel stood in the empty kitchen, invitation in hand, and felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. Not anger? She'd moved past anger years ago. This was certainty. She set the invitation carefully on the counter, smoothed out a crease that didn't exist, and pulled out her phone. Not her usual phone, the burner she kept taped under her bathroom sink, the one with only 3 numbers saved. She typed quickly. It's time. He's given us everything we need. The response came back in seconds. Confirmed. Proceed. Zenziel deleted the messages, powered down the phone, went back to wiping counters that were already clean. But something had shifted. The air felt different. Heavier. Like the moment before lightning strikes. Thalmus had spent 10 years treating her like she was invisible, like she was too small and too simple to matter. He'd given her access to his home, his secrets, his unguarded moments. He'd handed her evidence of fraud, bribery, and systematic destruction, and now he was inviting her to watch him celebrate it all, dressed in the uniform of her servitude, as a joke for his wealthy friends. He thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. And in 2 weeks at his exclusivity gala, in front of Manhattan's most powerful people, Zenziel was going to show him exactly how wrong he'd been. She folded the invitation in half, tucked it into her apron pocket, and got back to work. After all, she still had floors to clean, documents to photograph, evidence to gather. The trap was almost set. She just needed to wait for the fool to walk into it. 4 days before the gala, Zenziel stood in her studio apartment, the one-room place in Queens she'd lived in for a decade, where the radiator clanked and the neighbor's television bled through thin walls, and opened the gold leaf invitation one more time. She traced the embossed letters with her thumb, felt the weight of expensive paper, the kind that announced wealth before you even read the words. Thalmus had meant it as a humiliation. He'd probably told his friends about it already, set up the punchline, prepared them to laugh at the maid who didn't know her place. He had no idea he'd just written his own ending. She pulled a cardboard box from under her bed, taped shut, hidden behind winter boots she never wore, and carefully cut it open. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that crinkled like secrets, was the gown. Midnight obsidian silk that caught light and swallowed it. She'd had it made 6 months ago in a boutique downtown, paid cash, used a fake name. The seamstress had asked questions. What's the occasion? Where will you wear it? But Zenziel had smiled and said nothing. Some answers aren't meant to be shared. She lifted the dress carefully, held it up to the single window where streetlight filtered through. The fabric moved like water, like shadows, like power that didn't need to announce itself. She'd chosen obsidian for a reason. In her grandmother's stories, obsidian was the stone of truth. It reflected what people tried to hide, cut through lies, revealed the rot underneath pretty surfaces. perfect. From the same box, she pulled out a smaller case. Velvet. Locked. She'd kept the key on a chain around her neck for half a year, tucked under her work uniform where nobody would see. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. The heart of the Velt stared back. 50 carats of raw emerald, unpolished and ancient, the color of forests that existed before cities, before men like Thalmus learned to destroy things for profit. She'd bought it at auction in Zurich through a proxy, a lawyer who specialized in anonymous transactions, the kind of discretion that cost as much as the stone itself. The newspapers had gone wild trying to identify the buyer. Speculation ran from oil sheiks to tech billionaires to European royalty. Nobody suspected a maid from Queens. But Zenziel wasn't just a maid. She'd never been just a maid. She was the widow of Daniel Okafor, and 20 years ago, Thalmus Thorne had destroyed him. The memory came sharp and clean, the way trauma always did. No blur, no mercy, every detail preserved like evidence. Daniel, brilliant and trusting, excited about the startup he'd built with his college roommate, the proprietary algorithm, the meetings with investors, the future that seemed so bright it hurt to look at directly. Then Thalmus, younger then, hungrier, not yet the billionaire but already the predator, had made his move. Fabricated embezzlement charges, planted evidence in Daniel's files, convinced the board, convinced the lawyers, convinced everyone that mattered that Daniel Okafor was a thief. The company became Thalmus's foundation. The algorithm made him his first 100 million. Daniel went to prison. 3 years later, Daniel died. Heart attack, the medical examiner said. Stress-induced. Which was a clinical way of saying that Thalmus Thorne had murdered him with lies and stolen dreams, and a system that believed rich men over honest ones. Zenziel had lost everything. The house, the savings, the life they'd built. She'd worked minimum wage jobs for years, survived on anger and ramen, and the kind of exhaustion that makes sleep impossible. She'd wanted revenge, the hot kind, the immediate kind, wanted to scream his name from rooftops, wanted to burn his world down with matches and gasoline. But revenge without strategy is just noise. So she'd waited, learned, planned, changed her name back to her maiden name, Malangu, so background checks wouldn't connect her to Daniel. Spent 5 years working her way into positions closer to Thalmus's world. Housekeeper for his lawyer, nanny for his business partner's kids. Each job a step closer, each reference carefully cultivated, each connection mapped. Until finally, a decade ago, she'd applied to be his maid, and he'd hired her without a second glance. 10 years. She'd given him 10 years to feel safe, to forget that Daniel Okafor had ever existed, to build an empire so large and corrupt that its collapse would be spectacular. 10 years of photographing documents, memorizing passwords, recording conversations, mapping every illegal move he made. She'd gathered enough evidence to put him away for life 3 times over. But she'd kept waiting because prison wasn't enough. She needed him to fall publicly, completely, in front of the people whose opinions he valued most. She needed him to understand what it felt like to be powerless. The invitation had been the final sign. The moment she'd been waiting for. Thalmus so arrogant, so certain of his invincibility, that he'd invite his own maid to mock her in front of Manhattan's elite. He'd given her the stage. She was going to burn it down. Zenziel set the emerald back in its case and checked her other phone. Not the burner, the encrypted smartphone she'd bought last year with money she'd been saving and investing carefully for 2 decades. Money from Daniel's life insurance? Money from side jobs and hustle and living in a studio apartment when she could have afforded better. Money she'd turned into more money through patient, strategic investments that Thalmus himself had inadvertently taught her about by leaving financial journals in his bathroom. 3 new messages. All from people she'd spent years connecting with. A forensic accountant named Sarah who'd lost her job after refusing to falsify Thalmus's books. A former business partner named James who'd been forced out of his own company. A city councilman named Rodriguez who'd refused a bribe and found himself investigated for crimes he didn't commit. 12 people total, each one destroyed by Thalmus in different ways, each one waiting for the chance to return the favor. The consortium, she called them, though they'd never met in person, though most of them didn't know each other existed. She'd coordinated them carefully, giving each one a piece of the puzzle, never the full picture. Safety and separation, power and patience. Ready, Sarah's message said. Just that one word. Confirmed, from James. Standing by, from Rodriguez. Zenzel typed back to each. Saturday night. Watch the news. She deleted the messages, powered down the phone, stood in her studio apartment, soon to be her former studio apartment, and allowed herself one moment of something that might have been fear or might have been anticipation. Hard to tell the difference when they both made your heart race. In 72 hours, everything would change. Either she'd destroy Thalmus Thorne, or she'd lose everything trying. She looked at the gown hanging on the back of her door, the emerald locked in its case, the decade of evidence stored across 3 encrypted drives hidden in 3 separate locations. Everything was ready. Everything was in place. She just had to walk through the door without flinching, and Zenziel had spent 10 years learning not to flinch. The day of the gala arrived cold and bright, the kind of November afternoon where the city looked clean from a distance and gritty up close. Zenziel had taken the day off. First time in 10 years she'd requested a Saturday off, and Thalmus had approved it without question because, of course, he had. He assumed she needed time to prepare for her humiliation, maybe borrow a decent dress, maybe cry a little about her station in life. He had no idea she'd spent the morning at a private salon in Tribeca, getting her hair done by a stylist who worked with celebrities and didn't ask questions if you paid cash. No idea she'd spent the afternoon in her apartment, going through her evidence one final time, making sure every file was backed up, every detail confirmed. By 6 p.m., she was ready. The gown fit like it had been grown on her body. The emerald hung heavy and cold against her skin. She'd hired a car service, black sedan, professional driver, the kind that rich people used without thinking about the cost, to pick her up at 7:30. That would put her at the venue at 8:15. Fashionably late. Impossible to ignore. She was fastening the clasp on the emerald when someone knocked on her door. 3 sharp raps. Confident. Urgent. Zenziel froze. Nobody knocked on her door. Nobody knew this address except her landlord, and he never climbed the stairs unless the building was on fire. She moved to the peephole carefully, emerald swinging against her chest. Looked through. Marcus Chen stood in her hallway. Thalmus's head of security. 6'3", former military, the kind of man who noticed everything and said nothing. He wore a dark suit and an expression that might have been concern or might have been threat. Her mind raced through possibilities. Had he figured it out? Had Thalmus sent him? Was this the moment everything fell apart? She opened the door exactly 6 inches. Enough to talk. Not enough for him to push through. Mr. Thorne wants to see you. Marcus's voice was flat, professional, completely unreadable. Before the party. He sent me to bring you. Zenziel's pulse hammered, but her face stayed calm. 10 years of practice. I'm not scheduled to work tonight. I'm a guest. I know. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. That's why he wants to see you. Now. This was wrong, all of it. Thalmus had never summoned her outside of work hours. Never cared enough about her existence to track her down, unless he'd found something. Unless someone had talked. Unless the whole plan was burning down before she'd even lit the match. I'm not dressed yet, she said, which was a lie so obvious it hurt. Marcus's eyes dropped to the emerald at her throat. She watched his face change. Confusion, recognition, calculation. He knew that stone. Everyone who read newspapers knew that stone. The anonymous buyer, the record-breaking price, the mystery that had kept society columns busy for months. His jaw tightened. Where did you get that? None of your business. She started to close the door. His hand shot out, stopped it. Not aggressive, but firm. Ms. Malangu, listen to me. I know you're not just a maid. I've known for about 8 months. The way you move through that penthouse, the way you watch things. I used to do close protection for people who had secrets. You have the eyes. Her hand moved instinctively toward her phone, toward the panic button that would alert Sarah, James, the whole consortium that it was over. Wait. Marcus held up his other hand, palm out. I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to warn you. Thalmus doesn't know anything. He's too arrogant to suspect the help. But I do. And I'm guessing whatever you're planning involves tonight. Zenzale said nothing. Let the silence stretch. Evaluated threat levels, escape routes, whether she could take him if it came to that. Marcus glanced down the hallway, then back. 8 years ago, I was head of safety at Thorn Industries. I found structural problems in one of his developments. Serious ones. Building codes violated, materials substandard, inspection reports falsified. I told him we needed to halt construction, fix it properly. Know what he did? She waited. Fired me. Had me blacklisted across the entire industry. Then he had false reports filed saying I'd been taking bribes, doctoring my own safety reports. No charges stuck, but the rumors did. I couldn't get work anywhere for 3 years. Lost my house. Lost my wife. Had to rebuild from nothing. His voice stayed level, but something burned underneath. He hired me back 2 years ago because I was desperate enough to take it and qualified enough that he didn't have to train someone new. He thinks that makes me loyal. Thinks desperation equals devotion. Marcus pulled something from his jacket pocket. A key card. Silver, embossed with the venue's logo. The SEC sent 3 agents. They're already inside. 3rd floor balcony, east side. They've been there since 5 p.m. waiting. But Thalmus has private security stationed at every entrance. If you walk in the main doors looking like that, wearing that emerald, you'll spook him before the agents can move. He'll run. And men like Thalmus have very good escape plans. He pressed the key card into her palm. Service entrance, kitchen level. Yeah, gets you past security. Puts you on the main floor through the west corridor, 30 feet from the ballroom. Walk in from that direction. You'll have the agents between you and the exits. He won't be able to run. Zenzale stared at the keycard, then at Marcus. Why are you helping me? Because I've watched him destroy good people for a decade. Because I'm tired of being the muscle for a man who treats human beings like spreadsheet entries. Because he stopped. Started again. Because whatever you're planning, I want a front row seat when it works. She studied his face. The lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw. The way his hands stayed loose and visible. No threat, no deception. People lied with their words all the time. Bodies were harder to fake. How long have I got? She asked. Marcus checked his watch. 90 minutes, maybe less. Half the guests are already there. Thalmus is holding court by the entrance, waiting for you. He's told people to watch for the entertainment. He thinks you're his punchline. He's wrong. I know. Marcus stepped back. Service entrance, west corridor. Don't use the main doors. And Ms. Malangu? He met her eyes. Whatever evidence you've got, I hope it's ironclad. Men like Thalmus don't go down easy. It is. She closed her fingers around the keycard. And they do. You just have to know where to push. Marcus nodded once, turned, walked toward the stairs, stopped at the landing. One more thing. There's a photographer Thalmus hired. Told him to get shots of you in your work clothes for some kind of social media campaign. The guy's positioned near the main entrance. Avoid him until you're ready. Then he was gone, footsteps echoing down concrete stairs. Zenzale stood in her doorway, keycard in hand, heart racing but mind clear. 90 minutes. The SEC already in place. Thalmus waiting for his joke. Everything was still salvageable. Better than salvageable, Marcus had just handed her the perfect entry point. She went back inside, checked her appearance one final time in the mirror. The gown, the emerald, the decade of invisibility about to end in the most visible way possible. Her phone buzzed. The car service. "Ma'am, we're downstairs." "Change of plans," she said. "I need you to take me to the service entrance instead." She grabbed her clutch, small, elegant, containing nothing but her ID and a lipstick and the USB drive with enough evidence to dismantle an empire. Locked the apartment behind her, walked down the stairs in a gown that cost more than 6 months of her maid salary. The driver opened the door without blinking. Rich people were his entire world. A woman in an evening gown was just another Saturday night. But as they pulled into traffic, heading toward Manhattan, toward the venue, toward the moment she'd been building for 10 years, Zenziel allowed herself one small moment of gratitude. Marcus had been right. She did have the eyes. The ones that saw everything. The ones that never stopped watching, calculating, planning. And tonight, everyone else was finally going to see what those eyes had been watching. The car slid through city traffic like a shark through dark water. Zenziel sat in the back, spine straight, hands folded in her lap, breathing steady. She'd practiced this. The composure, the calm. You couldn't storm a castle screaming. You walked in like you owned it and waited for everyone else to realize they'd been living in your house all along. But her mind was moving fast, recalculating. Marcus's warning had changed the approach, but not the outcome. Service entrance meant fewer eyes, better positioning, element of surprise intact. The SEC already in place meant she didn't have to worry about coordination. Everything was still aligned, almost too aligned, which made part of her nervous. She'd learned not to trust perfect plans. Reality had rough edges that snagged even the most careful preparation. But she'd also learned that sometimes momentum carried you through, that the universe occasionally bent toward justice if you pushed hard enough in the right direction. Tonight would prove which philosophy was correct. The car pulled up to a side street 3 blocks from the venue, exactly as she'd requested. She paid the driver in cash, large bills, no change needed, and stepped onto the sidewalk. The gown moved around her legs like liquid night. The emerald caught streetlight and threw it back harder. She walked, 3 blocks in heels that cost more than her monthly rent, past restaurants where people paid $200 for dinner, past boutiques that didn't display prices because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. This was Thalmus's world. The place where money talked and everyone else whispered. She'd lived in the whispers for 10 years. Tonight she was going to make them scream. The service entrance sat behind the main building, down a narrow alley where delivery trucks unloaded champagne and caviar, and the kind of excess that people like Thalmus considered normal. A single security guard stood by the door, young guy, bored, playing on his phone. Zenziel walked up like she had every right to be there. The guard looked up, did a double take. "Ma'am, this is the service." He stopped, saw the emerald. Saw the gown. Saw something in her face that made him rethink whatever he'd been about to say. "You have a key card?" She held up Marcus's gift. The guard scanned it. The light turned green. "3rd floor," he said. "Elevators to your left." She nodded. Walked past him into a concrete corridor that smelled like industrial soap and expensive food. The sounds of the gala filtered down. Music, laughter, the particular pitch of voices that came from people who'd never known real fear. The kitchen staff rushed past her carrying trays, too busy to question why a woman in an evening gown was using their hallway. Invisibility, she'd learned, wasn't about hiding. It was about belonging so completely to a space that people's brains edited you out. She found the elevator, pressed 3, watched the doors close on her reflection. A woman who looked like she could buy and sell this building. Strange what clothes could do. Armor for the soul. The elevator opened onto a carpeted hallway. Muffled music got louder. She followed Marcus's directions. West corridor. 30 feet to the ballroom entrance. She could see light spilling out, hear the distinct sound of crystal glasses and carefully modulated conversation. She paused at a mirror mounted on the wall, checked her hair, her makeup, the emerald's positioning. Everything perfect, everything ready. From her clutch, she pulled out her phone, not the burner, not the encrypted smartphone, her regular old device, and sent 3 identical messages to 3 different numbers. I'm going in. Then she powered it completely down and left it on a side table. Where she was going, phones wouldn't help. The ballroom stretched before her like a stage. High ceilings, chandeliers. Maybe 300 people in formal wear, each one rich enough to buy her old life 10 times over. Senators she recognized from television. Tech CEOs whose faces decorated magazine covers. Old money and new money mixing uneasily, united only by their shared belief that they deserved to be here. And there, near the main entrance, exactly where Marcus had said he'd be, stood Thalmus Thorne. He was holding court with a small group, a congresswoman, 2 hedge fund managers, someone who might have been a television producer. His suit probably cost $15,000. His watch cost more than most people's cars. He looked like success, like power, like the kind of man who'd never faced consequences because consequences were for other people. He was laughing at something the congresswoman said. Cocktail glass raised, completely relaxed. He had no idea his world was about to end. Zenziel took 1 breath. 2. Let the moment crystallize. This was it. The culmination of 10 years. 20 years if you counted from Daniel's destruction. A lifetime if you counted from the moment she'd decided that silence was strategy and patience was power. She stepped into the light. The effect was instant and total. The people nearest the west entrance saw her first. Conversations died mid-word. Then the silence spread like ice across water, each person turning to look, to understand why the room had suddenly lost its voice. Within seconds, 300 people had stopped talking and were staring at the woman in the midnight obsidian gown with the emerald that belonged in museums. The chandeliers caught the stone, made it burn green fire. Zenziel walked forward. Not fast, not slow. Each step measured, each movement deliberate. She didn't look at the crowd, didn't acknowledge the stares. Her eyes found Thalmus and locked there. She watched his face cycle through emotions like a slot machine. Confusion. Who is that? Recognition. Wait, is that? Shock. It can't be. Panic. Where did she get that? Rage. How dare she? His cocktail glass slipped from his fingers. The sound of crystal shattering on marble echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. Expensive liquor spread across white stone. Nobody moved to clean it. Everyone was too busy watching. Thalmus lunged toward her, shoved past the congresswoman, nearly knocked over a tech CEO. His face had gone the color of bad meat, purple and gray, rage and fear fighting for dominance. He grabbed her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. Where did you get that? His voice came out strangled, desperate, loud enough for the front row to hear. If you stole from my safe, if you touched my things, I will bury you so deep you'll never see daylight again. I will destroy you. You spent 10 years telling me I was invisible, Thalmus. Zenziel's voice cut through his threats like a blade through silk. Calm. Clear. Cold. She looked down at his hand on her arm, then slowly back up to his face. I simply decided to finally turn the lights on. She saw the moment he understood. Not the full picture, not yet, but enough to know something was catastrophically wrong. His grip loosened, his eyes widened. He opened his mouth to scream for security. 3 men in dark suits stepped out from behind a marble column near the champagne fountain. No rushing, no drama, just professional, inevitable movement. They held up badges, federal badges, the kind that made even billionaires sweat. Thalmus Thorne, the lead agent said, voice carrying across the utterly silent ballroom. You're under arrest for fraud, racketeering, bribery, and evidence tampering. You have the right to remain silent." The room erupted. Not sound, gasps, whispers, the sharp intake of breath from 300 people realizing they were watching someone fall from grace in real time. Phones appeared, cameras, the flash of pictures being taken, evidence being documented, social media posts being drafted about the scandal of the decade. Thalmus's face went from purple to white. "This is insane. You can't, I have lawyers. I own half the judges in this city. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "We know exactly who we're dealing with." The agent pulled out handcuffs. Actual handcuffs, steel and certain. "We've been building this case for 18 months. We have documentation of every illegal deal you've made for the last decade, every bribe, every falsified record, every life you destroyed for profit." Thalmus looked around wildly, at the congresswoman who was suddenly very interested in her phone, at the hedge fund managers backing away, at the crowd that had celebrated him 5 minutes ago and was now documenting his destruction. "This is a mistake, a misunderstanding. Someone set me up. Someone—" His eyes found Zenzel, still standing there, still calm, still wearing the emerald he'd probably assumed she'd stolen from him. Understanding crashed over him like cold water. "You." The word came out broken. "You did this. You're nobody. You clean toilets. I'm the widow of Daniel Okafor." Zenzel's voice carried now, loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. Clear enough that there would be no confusion. 20 years ago, you framed my husband for embezzlement to steal his company. He went to prison. He died there. And I've spent the last 10 years documenting every crime you've committed since." The room went impossibly quieter. Even the phone stopped moving. Everyone was listening now. Really listening. "My name is Zenzil Malangu Okafor. I took this job for one reason, proximity. You thought I was invisible because I was poor, because I cleaned your floors, because I was black and female and beneath your notice." She smiled, and it wasn't kind. "But I saw everything, Thalmus. Every shredded document, every late-night bribe, every illegal deal. I photographed it, recorded it, built a case that's going to put you away for the rest of your life." She stepped closer. So close she could see the sweat on his forehead, smelled the expensive cologne that couldn't cover the stink of fear. "The invitation tonight? Your little joke about me wearing my work clothes? That was perfect. That was exactly what I needed. Proof that you were arrogant enough to believe you'd never face consequences. The final piece of evidence showing your complete lack of remorse, your contempt for everyone you considered beneath you." The agents moved forward. Thalmus tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The crowd had formed a wall of witnesses, phones up, recording everything. "You can't do this," he said, and his voice cracked. "I'm Thalmus Thorne. You're nobody now." Zenzel adjusted her gloves, each movement precise. "Just another criminal in handcuffs. Just another person who learned too late that power without conscience is just temporary theft." The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. Zip ties, actually. Plastic and unforgiving. Thalmus was screaming now about lawyers and connections and ownership, about how this couldn't be happening, wouldn't stand, was illegal. But the agents were already reading him his rights, already moving him toward the exit, already treating him like what he was, a suspect in custody, not a billionaire who mattered. Zenziel watched him go, watched him struggle and scream and demand things he no longer had the power to demand. Watched the crowd part to let him through. Everyone suddenly very interested in not being associated with him. And she felt, what? Satisfaction? Grief? Relief? All of it? None of it? Mostly just tired. The kind of tired that came from carrying rage for 20 years and finally being allowed to set it down. But she wasn't done yet. As the agents reached the ballroom exit, As Thalmus was being dragged past his former friends who were pretending they'd never known him, Zenzel walked to the podium at the front of the room. The microphone stood there, abandoned by whatever speaker had been scheduled for later. She stood behind it, looked out at 300 faces, and spoke into sudden, absolute silence. There's one more thing everyone should know about Thalmus Thorne. The ballroom held its breath. 300 people frozen between phones and champagne glasses, caught in the gravitational pull of a story that wasn't finished. Zenziel stood at the podium like she'd been born there, like she'd spent her whole life commanding rooms instead of cleaning them. She let the silence stretch, let the tension build, let them wonder what could possibly come next after watching a billionaire get arrested at his own party. For the past 5 years, she said, voice steady and clear, I've been coordinating with others, people Thalmus destroyed on his way up. A forensic accountant he tried to silence. Business partners he forced out. City officials he attempted to bribe. We formed what you might call a consortium. She saw confusion ripple through the crowd, saw the congresswoman lean forward, saw phones angle to capture better audio. We didn't just gather evidence against him, we bought his debt. The confusion sharpened into shock. Someone dropped a glass. Nobody moved to clean it. Every loan, every mortgage, every line of credit. For 5 years, we've been quietly purchasing Thalmus Thorne's financial obligations. It wasn't easy. He has holdings in 17 countries, debt spread across 43 institutions. But we were patient, we were thorough, and 3 months ago, we acquired the final piece. Zenzel pulled a single document from her clutch, unfolded it with movements so deliberate they felt choreographed, held it up so the front rows could see the letterhead. This morning at 9 a.m., the board of Thorne Industries voted unanimously to transfer ownership. The vote was 13-0. Turns out when you've built an empire on threats and blackmail, your board members are very eager to vote against you the moment someone gives them legal protection to do so. She looked toward the exit where agents were still processing Thalmus, where he'd stopped screaming and was now just staring back at her with the hollow eyes of someone watching their entire world collapse in real time. You're not being arrested in your ballroom, Thalmus. Her voice carried across the massive space, echoing off marble and crystal and the shocked silence of Manhattan's elite. You're being arrested in mine. The room erupted. Not gasps this time, actual sound, exclamations, disbelief. The kind of chaos that came from witnessing something that would be told and retold, that would become legend. That would change how people talked about power and revenge and the distance between the two. Thalmus's face went through something beyond emotion, beyond rage or fear, just pure existential collapse. The understanding that he hadn't just lost, he'd been systematically dismantled by the woman he'd considered too insignificant to notice. You were nothing, he screamed, the words ripping out of him. Nothing. You cleaned my toilets. No, Thalmus. Zenzile's voice cut through his breakdown like ice. I was invisible. There's a difference. And you never learned it. The agents hauled him toward the exit. He was still screaming, still struggling, but the words had dissolved into incoherent noise. The sound of a man who'd spent his whole life believing consequences were for other people finally meeting the bill. The doors closed behind him. The sound echoed. Final. For a moment, nobody moved. The ballroom existed in suspended animation, 300 people trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Then someone started clapping. Slow at first, hesitant. A woman near the back, Zenzile recognized her, one of the land trust community leaders who'd been invited as part of Thalmus's victory parade. The applause spread. Not everyone joined. Some people looked sick, probably calculating their own exposure, their own connections to Thalmus's crimes. But enough clapped that the sound built and built, filling the space where Thalmus's arrogance had lived for so long. Zenzile didn't acknowledge it, didn't smile or bow or perform gratitude. She simply folded the document, placed it back in her clutch, and walked toward the exit. Different exit. not the one Thalmus had been dragged through, the main entrance where he'd planned to humiliate her. She walked through those doors with her head high and the emerald burning green fire under the chandeliers, and she didn't look back. Outside, the November air hit cold and clean. The city stretched in every direction, indifferent to the drama of individual human lives, indifferent to justice or injustice or the small victories that felt enormous to the people living them. Marcus stood by a black sedan at the curb. Not her hired car, his personal vehicle. He opened the door as she approached. "Ms. Malangu?" He nodded once. Respect in the gesture, maybe even admiration. "Thank you," she said. "For the warning, for the keycard." "Thank you," he replied, "for finishing what a lot of us couldn't." She got in the car. He closed the door. Drove her through Manhattan traffic that was too thick and too loud and exactly the same as it had been before her world changed. They didn't talk, didn't need to. Some moments existed beyond language. He dropped her at her apartment building in Queens. The place looked smaller now, shabbier, like she'd been gone for years instead of hours. Like she'd become a different person in the space between leaving and returning. She climbed the stairs slowly, the gown dragged against concrete. The emerald felt heavier than it had before, weighted with the meaning of what it had witnessed. Inside her studio apartment, the one she wouldn't need much longer, Zenzal stood in front of the mirror and carefully unclasped the heart of the velt. Set it in its case. Unzipped the gown and hung it in her closet next to work uniforms she'd never wear again. She looked at herself in the mirror. Same face, same body. But something fundamental had shifted. The weight she'd been carrying for 20 years was gone. In its place, not lightness exactly, more like the clean ache of a wound finally allowed to heal. Her phone buzzed. The encrypted one. Messages flooding in from the consortium. Congratulations. Celebration. Relief. She read them without responding. There would be time for that later. Right now, she needed sleep. Real sleep. The kind she hadn't managed in a decade because she'd always been waiting, watching, planning the next move. But first, one more thing. From her closet, she pulled down a box she kept on the top shelf. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a framed photograph. Daniel, younger than she'd ever be again, smiling at the camera with the kind of hope that came from believing the world was fundamentally fair. She'd kept it hidden all these years, too painful to look at, too dangerous to display when she was living under an assumed name in Thalmus's world. Now she set it on her nightstand where she'd see it every morning. "We did it," she whispered to the photograph, to the memory, to the ghost of the man she'd loved and lost. "He's finished. And your name, Daniel Okafor, everyone's going to know what he did to you. Everyone's going to know you were innocent." The photograph didn't answer. The dead never did, but she thought maybe she felt something shift in the room. Permission to rest. Permission to be done carrying his memory like a weapon. She lay down on her bed still wearing her makeup, too tired to wash it off. Closed her eyes. Let herself drift toward sleep with the sound of the city humming through thin walls and the knowledge that tomorrow, everything would be different. Tomorrow, the news would break. The scandal would spread. Thalmus Thorne's empire would begin its very public collapse, and she would start the work of deciding who she wanted to be now that revenge no longer defined her. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, she slept. The sun came up the way it always did, indifferent to human drama, unconcerned with justice or revenge or the small ways people tried to balance cosmic scales. Zenzile woke at dawn from habit, reached for her phone before remembering she didn't have to check Thalmus's schedule anymore, didn't have to plan her day around his needs, didn't have to be invisible. She made coffee in her tiny kitchen. Checked her regular phone, 73 missed calls, twice that many messages. News outlets, lawyers, people she hadn't spoken to in years suddenly very interested in her story. She ignored all of it, drank her coffee black and bitter, staring out the window at Queens waking up below her. At 8 a.m. she got dressed, Not the gown, not her maid uniform, just jeans and a sweater, the kind of normal clothes she rarely wore because she was always performing one role or another. She grabbed her keys, locked the apartment, took the subway into Manhattan because old habits died hard, and wasting money on car services still felt obscene. She emerged at 59th Street and walked east. The November morning was clear and cold, the kind that made the city look sharp-edged and possible. She walked until she reached the building she'd spent 10 years entering through the service entrance, carrying cleaning supplies and swallowing her rage. The glass tower where Thalmus Thorne had lived in his penthouse fortress looked different in daylight. Smaller somehow. Just another expensive building in a city full of them. She walked through the main entrance. Not the service door. The main lobby with its marble floors and doorman who'd never spoken to her in a decade of seeing her carry mops and buckets. He looked up as she entered. Did a double take. Recognition without context. He knew her face but couldn't place it. The uniform was gone. The posture was different. She wasn't invisible anymore. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "Zenzil Mahlangu Okafor," she said. "I'm here for the penthouse." He checked his computer. Confusion creased his face. "I'm sorry, there must be a mistake. Mr. Thorne was arrested last night. As of 9 a.m. yesterday, ownership of this building transferred to a consortium I represent. Check your emails. You should have received notice from the new property management company around 6 this morning." The doorman clicked his mouse. Scrolled. She watched his face change as he read. Yes, I see that here. My apologies, Ms. Malangu Okafor. The elevator code has been changed. I'll need to escort you up." They rode in silence. Zenzila watched the numbers climb, watched the doorman sneak glances at her in the mirrored walls, trying to reconcile the woman in jeans with the name on his screen, with whatever he'd read in the email about ownership transfers and arrests and scandals that would dominate news cycles for months. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. Thalmus's home, or what used to be his home. The doorman stepped back into the elevator. "Will you need anything else, ma'am?" "No, thank you." The doors closed. She was alone. The space looked different, empty of Thalmus's presence. Still massive. 15,000 square feet of glass and marble, and the kind of excess that stopped feeling impressive once you understood what it cost. But hollow now, waiting to be filled with something new. She walked through rooms she'd cleaned 1,000 times. Past the kitchen where she'd made his coffee every morning. Past the living room where she'd dusted bookshelves he never read. Past the office where he'd shredded evidence and counted cash and destroyed lives with phone calls. She stopped at the office door, pushed it open. The massive desk still dominated the space. Cherry wood, probably cost $50,000. Probably chosen because the price tag mattered more than the craftsmanship. Behind it, the floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Manhattan like the city existed for the viewer's pleasure. Zenzile walked to the desk, sat in Thalmus's chair, the leather one he'd spent 10 years sitting in while she vacuumed around his feet. It fit differently than she'd expected. Less like a throne, more like furniture. From her bag, she pulled out the photograph of Daniel, the one she'd kept hidden in her locker for 10 years, too dangerous to display, too precious to throw away. Now she set it front and center on the desk. Right where Thalmus used to keep his awards and accolades and the photographs of himself with powerful people who no longer wanted to be associated with him. "We're home, my love," she said softly. "Not the one we lost, but something new." Her phone rang. She checked the screen. Sarah, the forensic accountant from the consortium, the woman who'd spent 3 years building the financial case against Thalmus. "Tell me you're seeing the news," Sarah said without preamble. "I haven't looked." Front page of every paper. Lead story on every channel. They're calling it the fall of the decade. The billionaire brought down by his maid. Some outlets are romanticizing it. Some are analyzing the class implications. Some are already trying to option the story for movies. "How are you holding up?" "I'm at the penthouse." Silence. Then, carefully, "Our penthouse?" "Yes." Jesus, how does it feel? Zenzel looked around the office. At the desk that had been Thalmus's seat of power. At the windows overlooking the city. At Daniel's photograph now occupying the space where ego used to live. Strange. Like I'm supposed to feel something bigger than I do. Triumph or satisfaction or closure. But mostly I'm just tired. That's normal. You've been running on rage and planning for 10 years. Now that it's done, the adrenaline crash is going to be brutal. Papers rustled on Sarah's end. Speaking of done, the land trust case? The city council voted this morning to reverse the zoning changes. Emergency session. Apparently, they're very motivated to distance themselves from Thalmus's corruption. The community keeps their land. Good. The community leader called me, Maria Rodriguez. She wanted your number. I told her I'd check with you first. Zenziel stood, walked to the windows, looked out over Manhattan, the city that had taken everything from her and Daniel, the city that had been both prison and hunting ground for the last decade. Give it to her. More rustling. There's also the matter of the properties. The consortium owns Thorn Industries now, along with all its holdings. The board is meeting next week to discuss liquidation versus restructuring. They want you there. Why me? You're the financial expert. Because you're the one who started this. Because the story isn't about spreadsheets, it's about what he did to people. And the board needs to decide whether we're building something new or just destroying something old. Sarah paused. Also because you own controlling interest. Did you forget that part? Zenziel had, actually. In the planning stages, she'd been so focused on evidence and timing and the perfect moment to strike that she hadn't thought much about what came after. About ownership, about power, about what you did with an empire once you'd conquered it. I'll be there, she said. They talked logistics for another few minutes. Lawyers, media requests, the inevitable investigations into whether the consortium had done anything illegal in acquiring Thalmus's debt. Sarah assured her everything was clean, everything was documented, everything would withstand scrutiny. Zenziel trusted her, had to trust her. You couldn't dismantle an empire alone. After they hung up, she stood in the office a while longer. Let the weight of it settle. This was her space now, her building, her view, her choice what to do with it. She pulled out her phone again, not the encrypted one. Her regular phone. Scrolled through the missed calls until she found the one she wanted. Maria Rodriguez. Community Land Trust Leader. The woman whose life Thalmus had tried to destroy for profit. She called back. Maria answered on the first ring. Ms. Malangu? Her voice was cautious, hopeful, afraid of hoping. It's Zenziel. I heard about the council vote. Yes, we can't believe it. After 2 years of fighting, suddenly they're falling all over themselves to protect us. The press is calling it political maneuvering, but I know the truth. You did this. You stopped him. We stopped him, Zenziel corrected. A lot of people contributed to bringing him down. But you started it. You spent 10 years. Maria's voice broke. Recovered. I'm sorry, I'm not usually emotional, but my family's been on this land for 30 years. My kids learned to garden in that soil, and he was going to pave it over for luxury condos. He was going to erase us like we never mattered. Zenziel looked at Daniel's photograph on the desk. Thought about erasure, about the way powerful people made inconvenient lives disappear. You matter. Your community matters. That's why I did this. The loan, Maria said. The bank called. They said our mortgage, $847,000, has been forgiven. Completely. They said the new building owner ordered it. That was you too, wasn't it? Consider it a gift from my husband, Daniel Okafor. He always believed in building things that helped people, in creating value that couldn't be measured in profit margins. This is what he would have wanted. Maria was crying now, No pretense of composure, just raw gratitude and relief. How do we thank you? How do we build something beautiful? Zenzel said. Keep the gardens growing. Keep teaching kids about where food comes from. Keep being the kind of community that makes a city worth living in. That's all the thanks I need. They talked a few minutes more. Maria invited her to come see the land trust, meet the families, be celebrated as the person who saved them. Zenzili agreed, though the idea of celebration still felt strange. She'd spent so long being invisible that visibility felt like wearing someone else's skin. After the call ended, she sat at the desk, her desk now, and looked at the wall behind it. Thalmus's Wall of Conquest, he'd called it. 20 years of framed magazine covers, photographs with politicians and celebrities, awards from business organizations that would probably be rescinding them by the end of the week. A monument to ego, a shrine to the self. She stood, walked to the wall, started taking down the frames one by one. The magazine covers went into a box for recycling. The awards went into another box for whatever charity wanted them. The photographs she looked at more carefully. Some she kept, the ones that might serve as evidence in ongoing investigations. Most she threw away. When the wall was empty, she stepped back. Blank white space. Potential. Room for something new. From her bag, she pulled out a folder. Inside were photographs she'd printed last week in preparation for this moment. Daniel smiling in their old apartment, back when they thought they'd build something together. The land trust families working in their gardens. Marcus Chen, the security guard who'd risked his position to help her. Sarah and James and Rodriguez and the other consortium members, people who'd been broken by Thalmus and chose to fight back instead of staying broken. She hung them on the wall. Not in expensive frames, just simple clips and tape. Temporary, until she figured out what permanence should look like. When she finished, she stood back and looked at her new wall of something. Not conquest, not ego. Maybe resilience. Maybe resistance. Maybe just a reminder that power could be used for things other than acquisition. Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. This is Marcus. Saw the news. If you need head of security for the new company, I'm available. Also, I make excellent coffee. She smiled. Texted back, interview next week. Bring your resume. And coffee. Another message. This one from James, the business partner Thalmus had forced out. Board meeting next Wednesday. I've been thinking about the company restructure. What if we converted it to a B Corp? Profit with purpose. Might be fitting. She liked that idea. Typed back, let's discuss. I'm open to radical changes. The messages kept coming. The consortium members checking in, celebrating, planning next moves. People from her past reaching out after seeing her name in the news. Journalists requesting interviews. Lawyers offering services. The entire machinery of a public scandal grinding into gear. She silenced the phone, put it face down on the desk, looked out the windows at the city stretching below. Somewhere down there in a federal holding facility, Thalmus Thorne was probably screaming about lawyers and injustice and how this couldn't be happening to him. Probably still believing that enough money or connections or rage would undo what she'd done. He'd learn, eventually, the way everyone learned, that consequences existed, that the people you stepped on remembered. That invisibility wasn't the same as powerlessness, but that was his lesson to learn, his prison to sit in, his reckoning to face. Zenzil's work was different now. Not destruction, construction. Taking the empire built on exploitation and turning it into something that actually helped people. Using Thalmus's own resources against his philosophy. Converting conquest into community. It wouldn't be easy. Some of the consortium members wanted to liquidate everything, salt the earth, make sure nothing of Thalmus's legacy survived. Others wanted to profit, cash out, take their revenge in money. She understood both impulses. But she kept thinking about Daniel, about what he'd wanted to build before Thalmus destroyed him, about second chances and new beginnings and whether it was possible to redeem poisoned ground. She'd figure it out. She had time now, had resources, had people who believed in something more than accumulation. She picked up Daniel's photograph, traced his smile with her thumb. "I miss you," she said to the glass, to the memory, to the man who'd believed the world could be fair if enough people cared about fairness. "Every day I miss you, but I think I'm finally done being angry. I think I can start being alive again." The photograph didn't answer, but the morning light coming through the windows hit it just right, made his smile look warm and real and almost like he was proud of her. She set it back on the desk, stood, walked to the massive windows one more time. The city below was waking up fully now, people rushing to work, delivery trucks making rounds, street vendors setting up carts, the endless cycle of lives being lived, problems being solved, dreams being chased. Most of them would never know her name, would never know what happened in this penthouse, would go on with their days completely unaffected by the fall of Thalmus Thorn. And that was fine. Good, even. Because this wasn't about being famous or celebrated or having her revenge witnessed by millions. It was about the quiet truth that no one was actually invisible, that the people who got treated like furniture were still people, still watching, still capable of bringing down empires if pushed far enough. It was about proving that arrogance was blindness, that power without respect was just temporary theft, that the greatest threat to men like Asmus wasn't the rival in the boardroom. It was the person they thought was too low to notice their mistakes. Zenzile had been that person, the one dismissed, overlooked, underestimated. The maid who cleaned toilets and said nothing and seemed to matter not at all. She'd spent 10 years being invisible on purpose, building her case, gathering her evidence, waiting for the perfect moment. And when that moment came, when Thalmus had invited her to his gala to humiliate her in front of Manhattan's elite, she'd walked in wearing power he didn't know she possessed and destroyed him with truths he didn't know she'd collected. She'd turned his arrogance into his downfall, his blindness into her weapon, his certainty that she didn't matter into the very thing that mattered most. And now she stood in his office, her office, looking out over his city, her city, and felt something she hadn't felt in 20 years. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of purpose. The knowledge that the hardest part was done and the work ahead would be different. Harder in some ways, easier in others, but hers to choose. She opened the massive windows. Cold November air rushed in, carrying the sounds of the city, car horns, sirens, people shouting in languages she didn't speak. The beautiful chaos of millions of lives intersecting, colliding, somehow coexisting. Behind her, on the wall, the photographs of her people watched. Daniel, Marcus, Sarah, the land trust families, the forgotten ones, the stepped-on ones, the ones who'd refused to stay broken. She thought about what to tell them, what message to share with people who might be fighting their own battles against their own versions of Thalmus Thorn. People who felt invisible, powerless, trapped in systems designed to keep them small. Maybe this: your silence can be strategy. Your invisibility can be camouflage. The people who dismiss you are giving you their greatest weakness, their certainty that you don't matter. But you do matter. Your story matters. Your patience matters. Your careful documentation of every wrong done to you matters. And when the moment comes, and it will come, if you're strategic enough, patient enough, angry enough to wait, you can turn your invisibility into their blindness. You can make them see you, really see you. In the moment their world ends and yours begins. That's what Zenzile would tell them, what she'd learned over 10 years of cleaning floors and gathering evidence and playing a role so perfectly that even she sometimes forgot who she really was. She'd tell them that revenge was possible, that justice, real justice, could happen, that the powerful could fall and the invisible could rise. But she'd also tell them the truth that came after. That revenge didn't fix the hole left by loss. That bringing down Thalmus didn't bring back Daniel. That winning the war didn't erase the scars from fighting it. She'd tell them it was worth it anyway. Because some battles need to be fought not for what they give you, but for what they take from people who shouldn't have had it in the first place. Zenziel stood in the penthouse, her penthouse now, and made a decision. She'd go to the board meeting. She'd restructure the company. She'd use Thalmus's resources to help the people he'd hurt. She'd build something Daniel would have been proud of. But first, she'd do something simple. Something human. Something that had nothing to do with revenge or empires or the complicated aftermath of winning. She'd go home to her studio apartment in Queens. She'd make tea. She'd sit on her bed and finally let herself cry. Not from sadness or rage or anything that needed fixing. Just from relief. From exhaustion. From the simple, overwhelming fact that it was done. The war was over. She'd won. And now she got to figure out who Zenzil Malangu Okafor was when she wasn't carrying 20 years of rage like a second spine. She looked at Daniel's photograph one more time. "I'm going to be okay," she told him. Told herself, told the empty office and the city below and anyone who might be listening. It's going to take time, but I'm going to be okay. Then she walked out of the office, through the penthouse, into the elevator, past the doorman who called her Ms. Malangu Okafor, now instead of ignoring her existence. She walked out into November sunshine and cold air and the beautiful, terrible, ordinary chaos of New York City on a Monday morning. And for the first time in 20 years, she wasn't invisible. She was just a woman who'd done what needed doing, who'd proven that arrogance was a blindness powerful people couldn't afford, who'd shown that the person you think doesn't matter might be the one documenting every mistake you make, who'd spent 10 years cleaning floors and ended up owning the building. That was enough. That was everything. The story was over. The life was just beginning. If this story made you think differently about the people you see every day, the ones serving your coffee, cleaning your office, doing work you barely notice, then maybe it did what it was supposed to do. Maybe it reminded you that everyone has a story, that dignity matters, that respect costs nothing but means everything. Hit that subscribe button if you believe people deserve to be seen, truly seen, no matter their position or title. Because every week, I bring you stories about people who refuse to stay invisible. People who prove that power isn't about position, it's about character. It's about how you treat others when you think no one important is watching. Drop a comment below. Tell me about someone in your life who deserves more recognition than they get. The coworker everyone overlooks. The family member doing invisible labor. The person who makes your life work but never gets thanked for it. Because we're all Zenzile sometimes. Unseen, underestimated, carrying more than anyone knows. And we're all Thalmus sometimes too. Blind to the people right in front of us, taking for granted what we should be grateful for. The question is, which one are you going to be today? See you next week. God bless you.